First of all, I would like to thank Ben Davidson and people who organize these events that helping us come together and actually learn some new thing about what we have discovered. And I met with Ben personally in 2014 at the Electric Universe Conference for the first time. I actually have been observing, watching his program for a while, since 2011. And meanwhile, I've been doing those similar observation just like Ben did, start back in 2009. So, of course, we discover really similar connections between the sun and natural disaster that happened here on Earth, and we all curious about how all this stuff occur and how it works. So first, I tried to look through conventional, mainstream literature to help understand the connections. But it seems like what we have discovered is more than what is in the textbook. So we have to figure out a way to explain this phenomenon. And if we keep looking somewhere else, like in conventional textbook, many conclusions seem to suggest that there's no connection. But I keep seeing connection all over and over and over the past 5 years, continuously. And the way to actually understand this connection, one is through understanding the physics behind it, and the other is about be able to predict or forecast such events. And that tells how you actually understand how this thing works. Just like the way the Wright brothers invent the plane. Of course, everyone have a dream of building a flying machine, but only a few success. Those two are the first one. So just like us here, we're the frontier, observer frontier. So those who are actually a pioneer in this field try to make something that used to be impossible possible. And that's for benefits for everyone's for this planet for the future. And I would like to contribute my understanding about what I have discovered in this conference. The first talk today is longitude wave in space as a trigger mechanism for Earth's natural disaster. And this will go through a theoretical understanding according to what I understand of how this works. And for tomorrow, I will go into more details about case study and how everyone can observe such connection by yourself. All right, we're going to start. So in order to understand the nature, we tend to rely on something that's actually tangible, something that's reliable, which is the truth, right? But the truth is really hard to find in scientific world. I mean, if we look through the history, it keeps changing all the time. Because we used to live in a world, what most scientists believe the world is flat, and it become round, and then now we think that the Earth is the center of solar system, and then it change again. It keeps changing and changing and changing. So we have to stick to the truth about the nature, which is called the law of nature, which is above the law of physics or any scientific theory. That is, for me, is I use for a reference when I do everything. I stick to the law called dependent origination. That means all things arise dependent upon multiple causes and multiple conditions. What it means is that something cannot exist by itself. it has to rely on something else for it to exist. For example, a person like me cannot exist without my father and my mother, right? I cannot just all of a sudden appear. And same thing for everything else. Everything we built, computer here, screen, it's a collection of something else building up into something. So, of course, everything has to have some cause, and there's a condition built into it. So another law is that you can actually perceive everything in dualities. What it means is, just like us, when we see something in that perception, of course, there's also something else behind it. We just need to be able to learn how to turn around. And actually, it's just like, I like to watch the movie The Zoolander, like that person only know how to turn left, right? They don't know how to turn right. So it makes his life difficult, right? So those kind of things is like, if you know how to turn this way, you have to know how to turn the other way. And you can see things the way it is, just like the way the nature tried to tell us. And of course, see things the way it is through impermanence. I mean, everything is subject to change, including the understanding of the universe, which maybe in 100 years, 1,000 years will change over time, depending on new informations. So we just accept it the way it is, and we just make use something useful out of it for our daily life. And of course, everything is a conditioned process. So it keeps changing and changing and changing. So this microphone, about 1,000 years from now, you don't call this a microphone anymore, right? So it's called non-self. Of course, go to the main topic here is the longitude wave and transverse. So we want to introduce you to the concept of longitude and transverse. This is the fundamental physics that everyone knows since like high school. So the way transverse wave works is that you have force actually perpendicular to the direction of the wave that is traveling. So you see a lot of ripples. It looks quite slow. However, on the other hand, is the opposite. You have the force acting on the same direction as the propagation. So you see here, there's different mechanism. One is moving slow, propagates slowly. The other is a lot of compression and travel faster. So this type of properties actually exist in every levels, from down to at the atomic levels, to the solar system, to our galaxy, and of course the entire universe. So we use this fundamental law to try to help explain what's going on in our solar system. So we can actually understand how natural disaster arise and fall, how it become materialized, and of course, and we can figure out how to predict the next one. This is the news from NASA, and actually a paper that's published in Nature in October this year. It's very new. They have discovered a mysterious ripple found racing through the planet forming disk. So what happened here is that you have a galaxy, and you zoom in here, you start to see ripple, this ripple here. And of course, those ripples, at some certain specific spot, you see a dense cloud of plasma start forming. And of course, if you zoom in a little more, you can see two types of wave. One is it's like a transverse wave, so it's like a ripple here. And the longitude wave, which is like a compression. You can see that line. So these are the fundamental properties of all matters in this universe. And this is how something become materialized when something condense in some certain energy where wave cancel and become condensed into matter. So we'll study this a little more in details. And of course, once it's condensed, it's not just forming a sphere. It actually form a disk. So we go through this process using a simple experiment that you can actually reproduce at home. So it helps us understand something a little more deep. So we go into one of the experiment here, which is everyone probably heard of the semantic experiment here. So we actually requires energy, frequency, and vibration. So in this case, we have powder, fine powder on the membranes, and we excite this powder using a vibration frequency, like a speaker sound, and you start to see how material become condensed around the center of this membrane. And of course, the most natural form of condensation is circle, like sphere. Of course, you can see dense matters around the sphere. And of course, it not only condense to a sphere, it actually have some activity inside. The first one is the circulation, just like the way you see it, like it's this. You also see a micro vibration if you observe carefully. It also have rotation, spin. These are all natural process. And of course, when something changes abruptly, it also creates eruptions. So these are high activities that occur in the sphere, which form through the process of just conventional vibration and repetition of the energy. So it's called frequency. Of course, from here, you can have some conclusion about how something is formed in the universe. Okay, another thing you just want to watch here. You see there's a chaotic process going on when you change the frequency. So there's some certain times where the sphere have instabilities. Of course, when it's calm again, and then you can change rotation speed, they can switch rotation from clockwise to counterclockwise. So from here, by just doing really simple natural observation, we can make some conclusion about some certain characteristic of this sphere, which first is circulation and convection. It's very similar to how the sun have circulation and convection. It's also have really similar characteristic as the Earth that have circulation and convection inside the Earth's core. You also have eruption and ejection. So sometimes it ejects particles out when there's some instabilities in the frequency and magnitudes. And that is very similar to the way we have solar eruptions and active regions at the sun. And if you watch carefully into the surface, you see around this surface here, and if you have time to go to YouTube and play this video again, you start to see micro vibration, nano vibrations around the surface of this sphere. And if you look at the surface of the sun carefully, you see this kind of spike that's occur along the surface. And this is what scientists call nanoflares. So there's a lot of similarities between this experiment and what we call the sun. So how the suns form is very similar to how we reproduce this experiment. And what's inside the sun is going to be very similar to what's inside the sphere. So you take the X-ray image of what's inside the sphere, you see that what's inside, there's not much activities, and it's likely to be hollow. Yes. Of course, next thing is external behavior. The external behavior, you can see there's a spin and spiral. You see that there's two main arms here. And it's very similar to the characteristic of the sun. It's called Parker spiral. The Parker spiral, you have two mainstream of solar wind that actually spin around the sun, creating a spiral patterns like this. And the scientist called Parker who actually have discovered this. So in realities, we can see many different ways of spiral form, like the way giant are sculptorious. And of course, it's called standing wave mode, which is a more disc-like structure that form around the sphere. And this is very similar to the way we see the orbital planes where all the planets lies. Or in other solar system like Hall-Torrey, there's a protoplanetary disk. You can see a lot of rings form around the sphere. So from this observation, we can see that you can actually reproduce a lot of different types of activities and characteristics of sun using a simple experiment. And using this simple experiment, you help us understand the process and coupling mechanism, how things are formed, how things sustain, and how things just dies down, depending on the external stimulation. Of course, what we call fusion is pretty much is a repetition of energy, fusing the material together at the surface of the sphere. Of course, we've got orders arise from chaos. And of course, the energy that used to create a sustained sphere doesn't come from the sphere itself. It comes from the surrounding. This is what I call non-self. Non-self. Yes. Or the opposite of ego. Okay? So ego is a misunderstanding of the nature. If you understand it right. And of course, there are two main wave patterns that actually create from this type of vibration. I call it quantum vibration. One is a spin and spiral wave, which is something that scientists now they have been studied intensively. And the other is called standing wave, which not many people have talked about in mainstream. But it actually exists, just like the planets exist in the orbit. But we're going to look into these more details of this type of vibration and how it propagates energy from the center, which is the sun, to the planets surrounding it. And of course, this is one of the experiments, just to show you how a longitude wave works, or some certain type of oscillation that has compression. Some type of vacuum sound. You see that all the columns, they actually vibrate together simultaneously. So when something actually happens at the sun, which is only one side of the electrode, everything will move together in synchronicity in this mode of standing wave. Another example is the cladding plate, which you probably see in one of the Ben's video on YouTube. So we put in here, it's called the cladding plates, where we apply energy right at the center of this plate. And of course, you can see how particles organize around the center of those vibration. So you start to see an organization of material forming a ring. And of course, when there are different types, frequency or increase in frequency, you start to see how things become a circle, like an asteroid belt, or all the planets that actually lies inside some certain spot around the sun. So, just a few more. Changing. reach some certain threshold, it change. Okay, so that's some example of how it works. So now you know when there's an end of the world, it's going to happen. End of the world scenario. Okay, just keep changing. So the orbits keep changing, the suns keep changing, the Earth will change. Simple as that.
You call that energy, but that's just frequencies we're dealing with, right?
Yeah, it's a vibration of energy, right? That actually translate. It requires mediums to propagate the energy that actually interact with matters.
And that has to affect our brains and our organs.
Oh yes, just like that. Now, you might ask that, okay, in space there's no sound, right? But if you think about it, that every single molecule is separated by vacuum, and they all interact with each other. Whatever that is, it's the same mechanism that what I believe is happening here. So this is like a more three-dimensional. You have a main power source here that vibrates the same standing wave, so you can see how material lock into position. And of course, if we change the phase of the amplitudes of this, you can see it start to move. And you zoom into this ball here, you see a micro vibration that actually vibrates all the time. Okay, so it's very similar way to how we have our solar system, where we have the main source of energy, which is the sun, which vibrates all the time. And of course, when the sun vibrates, everything else will vibrate. Of course, we don't just have the theory for nothing. We have to have some proof. And of course, all this, the theory come from the observation. So in this observation here, we know that the sun is the center of our solar system, and the Earth is the third planet from the sun. And of course, if you look at the wave, it's vibrating. It's going to be the third harmonics. And of course, depending on the speed that we actually think this is going to propagating, if it's a speed of light and it's travel at 149 million kilometers away from the sun, of course, what's its frequency? So the frequency come out to be about 3 millihertz. So do we observe that frequency at the sun? Yes, we do. We did observe that. It's called helioseismic activity on the sun. It actually have a vibration frequency around 3 millihertz. And this is a spectrum of the frequency. The x-axis represents frequency, and the y-axis represents the magnitude. So you see it peak around 3 millihertz. What about the Earth? The Earth is a denser object, has liquid and solid matter. So the vibration is really hard to see because it gets dampened more than plasma. So we need something excited to see those such vibration, such as earthquake. In this case, if we did measurements of the earthquakes, this is 1960 Chilean earthquake, and we have seismic monitoring station around the world. They pick up this frequency that Earth is shaking about the same frequency, around 3 millihertz, about those frequency. And this frequency is well known for heliophysicists as a 5 minutes oscillation. The one that we see this interaction also exists in the comet. In this case, it's comet Hale-Bopp, which travel in the solar system, and we observe the same type of oscillation. You can see that ring that form around the comet. And we measure the frequency of those vibrations. It's turned out to be the same. So it's around 3 millihertz. So between 2 to 5 millihertz. The tail itself actually shifts toward higher frequency. So you can find this in the paper here reference below. And of course, this is, we just need to combine all the understanding together and try to demonstrate how different type of energy coupling from the sun to the earth. And we know that from conventional understanding is heat, light, right, and radiation. And this is another mode. Oh, another mode is electric mode. And this is another mode, which is called the vibration mode. And the vibration mode, the best way to understand this is to use the tuning fork. So you have 2 tuning fork. And of course, this is demonstrated by the MIT Science Physics Department. I know you heard the sound. So now we aligned it. Now the source is dampened. See that the destination vibrates. So this is picking up the energy from vibration alone. Now, if there's something dampen it, you see what happened. There's no sound on the other side. Okay? So what does this mean? So if you have been watching Ben's YouTube channel, you also have multiple beats too. So sometimes when we actually observe solar activities, we see earthquakes or some certain change in climates. And sometimes when there's a solar activities and there's no earthquake. And people wonder why some correlation sometime occur and doesn't occur. And that's because the condition on the receiver change. So of course, those patterns exist for some certain time and then it disappears for some certain time because we need multiple conditions and multiple causes for something to happen. And I'll try to explain some more of this case study tomorrow about how to predict earthquakes and other types of natural disaster. And of course, if you see here, when something align, like the waveguides align between 2 tuning forks, you get maximum energy transfer between the transmitter and receiver. It's really similar to the way Ben, try to help us see is the coronal hole. Every time they align with our planets, there's something happen. It could be earthquakes or some a certain type of climate change and all kinds of things. And that's, I believe, is something to do with this type of phenomenon as well. So you can see that the particle or matters actually move one at the source, and you see particles and matters move on the destination. And somewhere between is really almost nothing. You hard to see it. So it's not just the matter shooting from the sun hitting the earth. That's just one mode. That's called particle mode. This is called wave coupling. So it's 2 types of energy coupling mechanism. Okay, next we go down to the earth a little more. We're going through electrical theory. So this will help us explain a little more about the natural disaster coupling mechanism. I have to rely on electrical model, which because it's a really efficient form of energy, and we use it every day, to transport energy. It's very efficient. So in the nature, in terms of electrical charge, you never see anything that remains static in this universe. You see lightning storm occur and then dissipate and then form again and dissipate again. So it never remains truly static or neutral for the Earth in this case. Same thing for atoms. You see all the charge between protons and electrons always separated. It just circulates around each other. It never actually combined. Of course, there's always charge separation when everything is remain separation. And of course, there has to be medium that separates those charge. And charge separate through space, vacuum, the air, atmosphere, or other certain types of dielectrics, just rock, tectonic plates, and all kinds of things. So, and of course, energy is stored in those medium. Not much stored in the conductors. And I will show you some experiment to prove this. So you can see that energy is actually everywhere, everywhere, in the atmosphere, on the ground, in space, in vacuum, it's just everywhere. And what we see plasma is just a symptoms of how energy transport from one place to the other place. And of course, if there are energy stored in medium, there have to be stress. Just like the tectonic plate build up stress. And of course, when it build up stress, it actually have charge building up in that material. And the way I see a natural disaster occur is the form of energy release from such stress. If stress is relieved from the atmosphere, it's in the form of lightning and rain. If there's stress release in the ground, it could be a sudden surge in electrical grid. It could be earthquake, or if it's something stress release even below it, it could be in the form of volcanic eruption and those type of things. So this is how I understand the natural disaster. And of course, through this ever-changing environment, it gets dissipated and it keeps building up again. So if we actually figure out how the nature of process of accumulation and dissipation of such energy, we can harvest it and use for our own benefits. And of course, manipulation. Yes. Okay, here, it's just some demonstration of how energy is stored. It's called dissectable capacitor. In this experiment, we use Leidenger and Ampere's machine to actually generate charge building up into a capacitor, which is called Leidenger. And over here, they're just building up charge, static charge. So on certain times, producing, it reaches some certain capacity of high voltage is actually arc across this gap. So this is just this charge buildup. So this is not the main point, but we're going to next experiment. So if we look at a capacitor, the capacitor consists of two plates. One is the positive plate, the negative plate, and the dielectrics that's sandwiched between. Those plates can be alternative charge, but this case is a direct charge. So you're charging up this capacitor in the center of this jar here. So the red represents the positive charge going to this conductor, and the black represents negative charge, charge going to this conductor. And of course, if we charge it up, the capacitor, there's going to be some release of energy at some certain point. So there could be a breakdown at some certain time. And another thing I want to prove about this experiment is that where the energy is stored is actually, well, you see for yourself. It's either stored in the conductor side or the glass side, right? But from the experiment, you see the conclusion So we remove that static generator, and we dissect pieces out. So that conductor removed from the glass. Okay. So you see that when copper touch each other, there's nothing happen because energy is not in the copper. When everything is assembled, see charge coming up. Okay. So we just proved that when you see solar flare, plasma, and all kinds of stuff, those are conductors. The real energy is surrounding that thing. So, well, of course, plasma has energy too, just like the transmission line transmit power coming in to our house, right? But the real power is in the surrounding of the conductor. Now we combine all those understanding together. We build up a model which is coupling between the sun and the earth. From what I understand, probably not going to be complete model of everything, but it's a model representing longitude wave coupling. So we have the sun, of course, relies on external energy to power the sun. And of course, it's going through this coupling transformer through this sphere. The sphere is like a capacitor that's actually building up charge where it collects energy. Of course, in this case, we have a generator here. I cannot use 3 millihertz, so I use 3 megahertz. You see the number here. 50% duty cycle. It goes power through this coupling, so it's inductively coupling to the coil here. So this thing has to work as a resonance structure. Of course, one side represents a medium that propagate energy to the other side. Goes to another sphere, which is the Earth. And of course, we just coupling the power, tap this power to the LED panel here. You see 6 LED light up on the back. Now, how are we gonna modulate this energy? So of course, there are 4 different ways. One is to modulate the potential or the generator itself. So either through magnitudes or frequency. You see this change in frequency. Now it's down to 2.5 megahertz. The LEDs goes off. Now it goes back to 3 megahertz. And increased frequency again, it goes down. So there's an optimum frequency where everything just sustained and stabilized. It's like what we have for our solar system today. So everything is stabilized. And what we see is pretty much some kind of micro vibration. So now the sun not only have that, it has coronal mass ejection. So you have different plasma density moving around from the sphere of the transmitter side. And of course, it affects the LED. Of course, there are coronal mass ejection moving toward the second sphere. You also see dimming on the other side. So you have multiple ways you can modulate the electrical energy or of the Earth. So in observation here, there are 4 major approach to modulate Earth's electrical environments. One is to modulating the galactic generator amplitudes and its frequency. And I call this a global change, so the total change in our solar system. And the third one is through the local sphere. One is the transmitter side, like when there's a celestial body passage, like comet passing through the sun. Also, the phenomenon called planetary alignment, which will be another complex subject that I have not gone over due to limited time. And of course, there are change in plasma environment surrounding the receiver side, which is the Earth. You have both type of wave, the longitude and transverse wave propagations, particles coming in, charge up the atmosphere. And you also have geocentric planetary alignments and celestial body passage. So this is a local change. Of course, this is some example when comet goes right into the sun and you have coronal mass ejection. So there's a change in the plasma environment surrounding the sun, affecting the sun itself. And this type of effects come from the outside the sun, does not come from the internal core of the sun. So this is a different view from the current Hell physics textbook. But which one is true? They have some truth in it. So we just use it for our own benefits, whichever one you like to use. And here is it's just like the way we use the hand to modulate this ball. I actually bring this set of experiment here, which I can show you later on if someone interested. And of course, we go to a little bit of math here, but this is like scientists use to explain so many things. It's really complex. I just want to point out a really small thing here, that there's dualities in everything. One is called electromagnetic, and the second one is called electrostatic. And electromagnetic, there are certain modes where there's no magnetic field, which is almost none, just light and nothing else. But in electrostatic, you have two modes that you can actually pick up, just like the word pick up things. That's some anomalies or other things that really hard to explain through just fluctuation of magnetic field. And that's called like ion acoustic wave, plasma oscillation. That's just part of it. Now we go to more Earth's side. So we go to the modulation. If something's moving at the sun, something has to moving at the Earth. So there's two sides here. The sun, you can see that there are many different type of activities, CME, sunspots, solar flares, coronal holes, etc. On the Earth side, you see a fluctuation of ionosphere, vanillin radiation belt, change in the climates, change in tectonic plates, volcanic eruptions, all kind of things. So you look at two things. You look over here one time, you look over here the other time, and you keep repeating, and you start to see connections. And of course, it's all something to do with charge changing in the environment. So we go into a lot more details here. Many of us already seen this, but charge actually help levitate matter. You can do this experiment at home using the washer dryer, the dryer at home in the dry environment, just like the cold weather here. You put a piece of clothes in the washer dryer, it builds static charge, and it actually floating above the air. But once it gets dissipated, charge gets dissipated, you see, you hear cracking sound, and then it falls down. So it no longer holds stress. So when it's actually stress, you can actually cause levitation. And this type of characteristic, you can prove that using lifter aircraft, things like that. You can search online on YouTube. People do that all the time. In this case, it's in terms of understanding as how the cloud levitates above the air, even though it's heavier than the air. Like when there's have a great floods, like billions of cubic tons of water flowing in the air, even though it's heavier than the air, how it keeps sustained. And of course, once there's a cracking sound, the energy build up, and of course, charge get dissipated, it falls down. It creates some avalanche effects, falls down, that's rain. So that's how it works. Same thing here for abrupt climate change. If we charge the plate with negative charge, and we simulate cloud with dry ice, you see that the cloud can be modulated using charge from above with different potential. So by doing this, you can see that if I use the hand, which is mostly dielectric, doesn't contain much of electrons, there's not much, you can actually modulate stuff in the ground without touching it at all, okay? So this is different type of things, but we need to understand that it's not just charged particle hitting something for something to happen. This is called induction. It's an action at a distance. So this is for paper. Of course, now if we use a highly conductive material, such as copper, you see it become more abrupt. And of course, we see that the Earth contains ionosphere, which is highly conductive. So anything that actually causes modulation in the ionosphere translate to the ground level. It's a simple observation that you can actually observe when you have solar activity. That's why you have changing climates below. It's not like you have to have some protective shield blocking thing. It's not like that. It's just pure electrostatic induction. And you can do that from below ground to like volcanic eruptions, which just have different charge potential. So next is going to another way to simulate tropical storm and tornadoes. You see that typically you have low pressure to actually help generate a storm. So the way electric works is that you need to bring the potential between two plates of the capacitor lower enough to initiate such events. Such as this one, we have magnets in the bottom of the glass and connected to positive terminal, and you have negative terminals here. This thing is salt water, so it just helps you visualize how vortex form. And actually, water itself is like, it behaves like plasma. So it does conduct electricities and actually like to behave like this type things. Just like we see tornadoes, how that's formed. And this is called Thomson tornado theories. And next one is a little bit more. So you can see the initiation of the vortex, just like big storm. So we have charge potential that's separate between the ground and the atmosphere. In this case, is 10 kilovolts, which is about the same level of potential we can measure in the atmosphere. You see how the mass of water transfer from one side to the other side a little bit. It's a water bridge, yes. And this is, of course, there are columns that go one side and columns go the other side, but the net mass transfer is upward, so go to this beaker. So this is how we can accumulate storm once we have sudden pulse, some pulse from the sun. There's some compression in the atmosphere, and of course, it's accelerate cloud formations. It seeds cloud and vortex start to form. So another thing, just want to see how the storm initialized. So you just move the plate together, close together enough, but of course it needs some kind of initial, high moisture concentration to begin with. So you move again, closer enough, tornado just pop right off. The water spout just pop right off, just like the way you see from here. So this is pretty much just summing up everything about what we see here is that we see compression and expansion of layers of matters. And those layers contain charges. So you have electric field and magnetic fields going perpendicular to each other. But once there's some modulations in those layers, you start to see charge separate within the same layers. And of course, there's some kind of if charge separation here, if this plate represents the ground, the tectonic, when the stress building up on the tectonic during those times, earthquakes will occur. However, if there's high moisture contents in the atmosphere, energy has to go somewhere. So it starts to form vortex around the medium, which is called atmosphere. So you see different effects, which is tropical storm formations, more rains, cloud, like today's cloud. And of course, it becomes more of the weather effects than the earthquakes. So there are certain types and certain conditions actually building up this thing to become different type of natural disaster. for a certain time. We don't do like one-to-one statistic. We have to understand the coupling mechanism and multiple cause and effects in order to do the correct type of statistic to tell what is real and what is not real, what is random and what is coincident. So we have to understand deep into the physics behind the mechanism, which this is how I understand it. So of course, same thing for earthquakes. We see that electric field modulation in the earthquake zone. We see lights and sound, cracking sounds, all this charge, like the Japan earthquakes, or in Pakistan earthquake in 2013. And of course, there are something happened here. The new islands form, like a round circle, like electrical discharge. When you put in a welding machine, it formed like a welding spot. Same for volcanic eruptions, charge building up, and of course, you see lightning. Just one last but not least, just a few case study here so you understand a little more in details. Like some initiation from the sun, like the solar activities, there's some solar flares and eruptions that say occur on the February 25th, 2014. You see that there's a big coronal mass ejection occur. And of course, if you look into, if you understand the longitude wave propagation, it typically travels faster than conventional plasma. But we can look into this plasma ring, and it can represent as something that propagates along the orbital plane of the solar system. So it arrived on the 26th, and of course, and see me, first see me passing through the orbital path, no charge, it just missed Earth a little bit. And then you have a main CMEs, which have more dense cloud or plasma passing through on the 27th. So what's going to happen when you have high density plasma versus low density? So high density one will increase ionization in the atmosphere. The low density one will cause fluctuation in electric field. So for the first initiation, you see the earthquake right there, just pop up. Just not so big in that zone, but it's significant in that zone. If people live in that area, they know this is significant. And of course, you have volcanic eruptions, some more earthquakes activities. But if some mass of plasma arrive and become dense around the Earth's atmosphere, energy is going to go to the atmosphere rather than go to the ground. So let's look at on the 27th. You see snowstorm, different types of natural disaster. Tornadoes formation, which relies on charge building up and modulation of the pressure, to tropical storm, and of course the big storm, big spiral vortex around California coast. And once you have those stuff, you also have associated wind. So during the time when there are the sun's first impulse and there's something that's high particle, charged particle hitting the Earth, there's always going to be some kind of wind gust that happen. So that's what I observed, but of course, different places have different type of conditions, so just use it for your own benefit. If it doesn't fit, then it's fine. But I see this happen over again. Of course, there's flood happen. Now we move to the peak of the sunspot. Now we look at the sun when it's most active. Sudden surge again, so you get another earthquake. About six magnitudes in Nicaragua, 6.7 in Japan around the same time. Of course, we have some new types of tropical winter storm form and big tidal wave. So in conclusion here, I present the longitude wave, its characteristics, and how we can use it to understand the sun and solar activity. We also use this type of characteristic to understand the electrical energy coupling between Earth and the sun. And of course, we use that to explain natural disaster using all this electrical model And of course, this is tell us that how important it is that we need to observe space weather. And we need to observe it correctly, meaning there's different definitions, a little different definitions than the conventional textbook. And of course, you can verify this by your own experience. And of course, you can test it to experiments. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much for listening.